I can still hear the way her voice trembled that night. It was supposed to be a moment of celebration. The dining table was covered in pink balloons and a cake topped with little sugar roses. My daughter had just turned 8. I'd been planning her birthday for weeks, ordering her favorite vanilla cake with strawberry icing, wrapping the art set she'd been hinting about for months, making sure the house was warm and bright. But as the candles flickered in the soft light, she looked up at me, her eyes glistening, and whispered, "I miss Mom." I froze. The sound of children laughing in the background faded away in my ears. All I could hear was my heartbeat, heavy and uneven. For a moment, I didn't know if I should smile and distract her, or let the ache settle between us. My throat tightened, and I simply reached out to hold her hand. 2 years had passed since we buried her mother. 2 years of bedtime stories told by just me, of mornings where I poured her cereal while my coffee went cold, of smiling for her sake while hiding my own exhaustion. I thought we were healing. Or at least learning to live with the pain. But that night, I realized something: grief doesn't mark dates on the calendar. It doesn't fade neatly with time. Sometimes, it shows up in the middle of a birthday party, uninvited. What my daughter didn't know, what I didn't know at that moment, was that someone else in the room had been watching us. Our pastor. He'd been sitting quietly in the corner, speaking to a few other guests, his eyes occasionally drifting toward us. And what happened next would change us both. The thing about birthdays, especially for kids, is that they're supposed to be anchors of joy. No matter what else is happening, there's cake, laughter, and a reminder that you're loved. I'd done everything I could to make that day a shield against sadness. But I had underestimated how memories work for a child. She didn't just see the cake. She saw the empty chair where her mom should have been. She didn't just hear the singing, she heard the missing harmony that used to come from her mother's voice. I wanted to tell her something wise, something that would make it better. But grief has a way of stealing words. So instead, I just held her gaze, praying silently that God would comfort her in a way I couldn't. It's strange how in moments like that, you're aware of everything: the smell of the candles burning, the faint music playing in another room, the way the light caught the tears in her eyes. Every detail burned into my mind. I didn't notice the pastor getting up from his chair. I didn't hear him walking across the room. All I knew was that one moment, it was just me and my daughter, and the next, he was standing beside us, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to make a joke or say it would be okay. He just looked at us, really looked, as if he understood everything without me having to explain. And then he asked a question that still echoes in my mind: "Would you let me pray with you right now?" I'm going to tell you everything that led to that moment, the story of how I met my wife, how we lost her, and the journey of trying to raise a little girl who still wakes up crying for her mom. I'll share what the pastor prayed that night, why those words still echo in my mind, and how that prayer became the turning point I never saw coming. Because if you've ever carried a loss so deep that you thought nothing could touch it, you might need to hear this story. Now, let's go back. Before the cake. Before the tears. Before I was a man raising a daughter alone. People often see you in the middle of your story and assume they know the whole book. They see a single dad and think, he must have always been strong. But the truth is, my story began with weakness, with a young man who didn't have it all figured out. I met Emily on an ordinary afternoon that would become anything but ordinary. It was at a small-town coffee shop, the kind where they still wrote your name on the cup in shaky marker and played soft acoustic guitar in the background. She was sitting in the corner, sketching something in a notebook. I ordered my coffee and, without thinking, asked her what she was drawing. She looked up, smiled, and said, "A house I haven't lived in yet." That answer, it stuck with me. I didn't know it then, but that was Emily, always dreaming, always seeing something beautiful that wasn't there yet, always believing it could be. She was the kind of person who could find poetry in a rainy day, who could make a chipped mug feel like a treasure. We started talking. Talking turned into late-night phone calls. Those calls turned into long walks under the streetlights, where we shared secrets and future plans. I remember her laugh, not loud, but warm, like it belonged to you the moment you heard it. Before long, I couldn't imagine my life without her in it. We married on a crisp autumn afternoon, surrounded by gold and red leaves. I remember holding her hands during our vows, feeling like the entire world had gone quiet just for us. When we danced later that night, she whispered in my ear, "We'll build that house I told you about. You'll see." 2 years later, our daughter was born. We named her Grace. Grace was everything Emily and I had prayed for. She had Emily's eyes, deep brown, full of light, and my tendency to make a mess wherever she went. Emily was a natural mother, patient and gentle, but also playful. She'd sit on the floor with Grace for hours, building block towers just to knock them down again, laughing every time. Our home was full of music, coffee brewing in the mornings, and the sound of Grace's little footsteps on the hardwood floors. Saturdays meant pancakes and messy hair. Sundays meant church, where Emily would hold Grace in her lap and whisper the lyrics of hymns into her tiny ear. Life wasn't perfect, whose is? But it was ours. And it was good. The day everything changed started out normal. It was a Tuesday, and Emily wasn't feeling well. She brushed it off as a flu, told me not to worry. But by evening, her fever had spiked, and she was struggling to catch her breath. I drove her to the hospital, expecting they'd give her medicine and send us home. They didn't. By midnight, she was in the ICU. By sunrise, the doctors were telling me words I couldn't process: infection, complications, critical. I remember sitting in that sterile waiting room, my hands pressed together so tightly they hurt, bargaining with God in whispered prayers. She fought for 3 days. And then, she was gone. Those first months after losing her were a blur. I woke up every day to a house that felt too quiet, even with a toddler in it. I kept expecting to hear Emily's voice calling me from the kitchen. I still made coffee in the mornings, but I couldn't drink it. It tasted bitter without her sitting across from me. People told me to stay strong for Grace, but they didn't see the nights I sat on the bathroom floor, holding my shirt over my face so she wouldn't hear me cry. Grace was too young to understand. At first, she thought Mommy was just away for a while. She'd ask if she was coming back after work, or if we could visit her. Once, she even packed a little bag with crayons and her favorite doll, saying she was ready to go see Mommy. Those moments, they break you in ways no one can see. Time passed, as it always does. Grace grew. She started school. She learned to ride her bike, wobbling down the driveway while I ran behind her, my heart pounding, part from fear she'd fall, part from the bittersweet thought of how much Emily would have loved to see it. We built new routines, just the two of us. I became the one who checked her homework, braided her hair before school, and made her favorite pasta just the way Emily used to. I made sure there was laughter in the house, even when it felt heavy. But grief isn't a clean cut, it's a scar that aches on rainy days. And for Grace, that ache often came on birthdays, Christmas mornings, and quiet nights before bed. And then came the year Grace turned 8, the year of the pink balloons, the strawberry cake, and the pastor's prayer that changed everything. Birthdays in our house had always been a big deal. Emily used to say that every year was a chapter in a book, and a birthday was like putting a ribbon at the start of a new page. Even after she passed, I tried to keep that spirit alive for Grace. For her 8th birthday, she wanted 2 things: strawberry cake and the kind of balloons that float all the way to the ceiling. I told her we could do both, and maybe even a little extra. The night before, after Grace had gone to bed, I stayed up late decorating. Pink and white streamers draped across the living room. Balloons tied to chairs. The smell of cake, fresh from the bakery, filled the air. I'd ordered it from the same place Emily always did, right down to the little sugar roses on top. I thought I was ready for the day. I thought I'd planned for every possible emotion. I was wrong. The morning began with the sound of tiny feet running down the hallway. Grace burst into the kitchen wearing her favorite purple pajamas, her hair wild from sleep. She gasped when she saw the decorations. "You did this?" she asked. "All for you," I said, lifting her up for a hug. Her smile was pure light. She twirled in the living room, the ribbons and balloons swaying above her head. In that moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be a day untouched by grief. The guests began arriving around noon. Close friends. Family. A few kids from her class. Laughter filled the air, and the house felt alive in a way it hadn't for a long time. Even the pastor came, though I wasn't expecting him. He had married Emily and me, baptized Grace, and had been there the day we buried Emily. He shook my hand and said, "Just here to celebrate." By mid-afternoon, it was cake time. We all gathered in the dining room. Grace stood in front of the table, 8 candles glowing on the pink frosting. Everyone began singing. She closed her eyes to make a wish, and that's when it happened. When she opened them, she didn't blow out the candles right away. She looked at me, her eyes shimmering, and whispered, "I miss Mom." The words cut through the air like glass breaking. The singing slowed, then stopped. A hush fell over the room. I could feel the lump in my throat, the burn in my chest. My hand rested on hers, and I tried to smile, not because I wasn't hurting, but because I didn't want her to carry my pain along with hers. For a few seconds, it was just the two of us, caught in that moment of shared ache. But out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the pastor watching us. His expression wasn't pity, it was something deeper, something like understanding. He didn't move right away. He waited until Grace had blown out the candles and the guests began talking again. Then, quietly, he stepped forward. He put a hand on my shoulder, leaned in slightly, and asked softly, "Would you let me pray with you both? Right now?" I glanced at Grace. She nodded. We stepped aside, into the corner of the room, away from the noise and the smell of frosting. The pastor took Grace's hand in one of his, mine in the other. His voice was low but steady. "Lord," he began, "you see this father and daughter. You know their story, their loss, their love. You know the weight they carry, and you know the healing they need." Grace squeezed my hand. "On this day of celebration, Lord, we remember Emily, a wife, a mother, a light in their lives. And we ask that you would fill the empty spaces with your presence. Let your peace be their gift today, and every day forward." By the time he said amen, my cheeks were wet. Grace leaned into me, her head against my chest. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was holding her up alone. The rest of the party went on, cake was eaten, presents unwrapped, but something had shifted. The air felt lighter, even though nothing about our circumstances had changed. It was as if that prayer had planted a seed we didn't yet understand. It wasn't the first time someone had prayed for us since Emily passed. But it was the first time it felt like the prayer didn't stop at the ceiling. The pastor didn't rush. His voice carried the weight of someone who had been in dark valleys himself. He didn't speak like he was performing a ritual, he spoke like a man talking to someone who was already in the room. We were standing near the window, sunlight spilling across the floor in warm rectangles. Outside, I could see the balloons bobbing against the porch rail in the breeze. Inside, the air smelled faintly of frosting and coffee. The laughter from the other room was distant, muffled, as though the world had stepped back and made space for us. Grace's small hand was in his left, mine in his right. His grip was firm but gentle, like he wanted us to know we weren't alone but also that we didn't have to be strong in that moment. "Lord," he began, his voice low and even, "thank you for the gift of Grace's life. Thank you for these 8 years, for every laugh, every tear, every step she has taken under the care of her father." Grace looked up at me briefly, and I saw her eyes soften. The pastor continued, "We come before you today with hearts that are both joyful and heavy. Joyful for the blessing of another year. Heavy because we still miss the one who isn't here to see it." I felt my chest tighten, but this time I didn't fight the tears. They slipped down my face, slow and hot, while the pastor's words wrapped around us like a blanket. He paused, and the silence wasn't awkward, it was holy. "God, you know Emily. You know her smile, her laughter, the way she loved her family. And you know the space her absence has left. We ask you now, Lord, to step into that space. To be the comfort in the quiet, the joy in the mornings, and the peace that carries them through nights when the ache feels too deep. Grace's fingers curled tighter around mine. She didn't cry, but her shoulders leaned into me, her small frame relaxing as though she'd been holding her breath for a long time. Then the pastor did something unexpected. He lowered himself to one knee so he could look Grace directly in the eyes. "Sweetheart," he said softly, "you'll always miss your mom. That's because your love for her is real. Missing her doesn't mean you're weak, it means you remember her. And remembering her is a way of keeping her close." Her lips trembled, and she whispered, "But I don't want to be sad on my birthday." The pastor smiled, not with pity, but with warmth. "It's okay to be sad and happy at the same time. God made our hearts big enough to hold both." When he stood back up, he placed his hand gently on my shoulder again. "And for you," he said, "remember this, you don't have to fill every gap. You're not alone in raising her. The same God who gave you Grace will give you the strength to guide her." I couldn't speak. My throat felt thick. All I could do was nod. He closed the prayer simply, "Lord, bless this family. Let their laughter be louder than their tears. Let hope be stronger than sorrow. And let this birthday be a reminder that life, though different now, is still full of your goodness." "Amen," we both whispered. When the pastor let go of our hands, it felt like a shift had happened, not outside us, but inside. The grief was still there, but it wasn't sitting on my chest anymore. It was quieter, as though it had been acknowledged and gently set down for a while. Grace tugged my hand. "Dad," she said, "I feel lighter." I smiled through damp eyes. "Me too." The rest of the afternoon played out like any other birthday, cake smeared on cheeks, wrapping paper everywhere, children running around the yard. But something in me had changed. I realized that while I had been trying to shield Grace from her grief, maybe what she needed was permission to carry it openly, without fear it would ruin the joy. And maybe I needed that too. That night, after the last guest left and the house grew quiet, I found Grace sitting cross-legged on her bed, the remains of her birthday balloons tied to the footboard. She was unwrapping the markers from her art set, the gift she wanted most. I sat on the edge of her bed, ready to tell her good night, but before I could speak, she said, "Dad, when Pastor prayed today, I felt like Mom could hear us." Her words stopped me cold. I thought back to the way she'd leaned into me during the prayer, how her eyes seemed less heavy afterward. I realized she wasn't just comforted, she was connected. For years, I had been afraid to talk too much about Emily in front of Grace, worried it might deepen her sadness. But that day, I learned that silence doesn't heal grief, it can make it heavier. So we talked. We talked about Emily's laugh, the way she used to sing in the kitchen, how she could never quite get a pancake to flip without tearing it. Grace giggled through tears, and I found myself laughing too. It was the first time in years that our memories of Emily didn't feel like a wound, they felt like a gift. In the weeks that followed, small changes began to take root. Grace started asking me more about her mom, not with the haunted sadness she once had, but with curiosity, like she wanted to carry the best parts of her forward. One morning, I came downstairs to find her packing her lunch. She'd made a peanut butter sandwich and cut it diagonally, something Emily always did. "Mom used to do it this way," she said matter-of-factly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I realized then that Grace wasn't just moving on, she was moving forward, bringing Emily with her in ways big and small. As for me, the pastor's prayer had planted something deep. It wasn't instant peace, grief doesn't work like that. But it was a reminder that I didn't have to carry everything alone. I began praying more with Grace at night, not just for things we wanted, but for the strength to face what we couldn't change. And little by little, I started to notice how those moments of prayer shifted the tone of our home. There was still sadness, yes, but there was also warmth, and laughter, and light. One Sunday after church, I pulled the pastor aside. I told him that what he had done on Grace's birthday was more than a gesture, it was a turning point. He smiled and said, "Sometimes all a person needs is permission to let the light in." I think about that sentence often. Grace's 9th birthday came around a year later. We still missed Emily, that would never change, but there was no dread in the air this time. We baked the cake together, decorating it with sugar roses like always. When it came time to blow out the candles, Grace closed her eyes, and when she opened them, she said, "I'm glad Mom got to be my mom." There were tears in my eyes, but this time they weren't heavy. They were grateful. If you've ever felt like your grief is too deep to carry, I want you to know something. It doesn't have to be rushed. It doesn't have to be hidden. And it doesn't mean your joy is gone forever. Sometimes, joy and grief can sit side by side at the same table, and that's okay. For us, it took a prayer on an ordinary afternoon to see that. For you, it might be something else. But whatever it is, I hope you let the light in when it comes. If this story touched your heart, I'd be honored if you subscribe to the channel. Share it with someone who might need the reminder that they're not alone in what they're carrying. And remember, hope is still here.